On September 16th, 2025, the world lost a legend. Robert Redford passed away at 89. Official reports cited old age, but those in the room know the real story is far more tragic. Before he took his final breath, Redford reportedly whispered a few words that brought his family to tears. They weren't about his movies. They weren't about his Oscars. They were about the heartbreak he had carried in silence for 5 years. He finally revealed that he wasn't afraid to go because he was late for a meeting. What did he say? And who was he running to? This is a heartbreaking true story of Robert Redford's final reunion. The man behind the mask. To understand the weight of his final words, we must strip away the mask of the golden boy. For 6 decades, Robert Redford was the face of American cinema. He was a Sundance Kid. He was the man who washed heroin out of Africa and made women around the world swoon. He was the billionaire in Indecent Proposal. He represented a specific kind of perfection, rugged, handsome, successful, and untouched by the griminess of life. But Redford hated that image. He spent his entire life trying to destroy it. He famously said, "I was always treated like a fair-haired boy, but I never felt like one. I felt like a fraud." Why? Because while the world saw a charmed life, Redford was living a tragedy. He knew that his beauty was a lie. He knew that money couldn't buy protection. He bought thousands of acres of land in Utah, not to show off, but to hide. He built a fortress of solitude in the mountains. He wanted to protect his family from the Hollywood curse. He wanted his children to grow up with dirt on their hands and the wind in their hair, far away from the drugs and the egos of Los Angeles. He thought that if he built the walls high enough, death couldn't get in. He thought he could save them. But as Redford learned in the most brutal way possible, you can run from the paparazzi, but you cannot run from fate. The tragedy that defined his life didn't happen on a movie set. It happened in a nursery. And then, 60 years later, it happened again. The first scar. The first crack in Robert Redford's heart appeared in 1959. He was just 23 years old. He wasn't famous yet. He was a struggling artist living in New York, married to his college sweetheart, Lola Van Wagenen. They were broke, but they were happy. They had just welcomed their first child, a son named Scott. Scott was their future. He was the proof that their love was real. But when Scott was just 10 weeks old, the unthinkable happened. One morning, Redford went to wake him up, and there was only silence. It was sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. In 1959, doctors didn't understand it. There was no explanation. Just a healthy baby boy, gone in the night. The pain was catastrophic. Redford, a man of few words, internalized the grief. He didn't cry in public. He didn't go to therapy. He blamed himself. He later admitted in a rare moment of vulnerability, "As a parent, you tend to blame yourself. You think, did I miss something? Could I have saved him?" That creates a scar that never completely heals. Imagine the torture. A year later, he became a star. He had to smile for cameras. He had to play romantic leads. He had to be the golden boy. But every time he looked at a baby, every time he played a father on screen, that wound would reopen. He poured that rage and sorrow into his work. But he made a vow. He would protect his remaining children with his life. He and Lola had 3 more children, Shauna, James, and Amy. But the shadow of loss hung over the family like a storm cloud. His son, James, was born premature with respiratory distress syndrome that nearly killed him. Redford spent months in hospitals, watching his tiny son fight for every breath, terrified that history was repeating itself. James survived childhood, but he developed severe health issues, including ulcerative colitis, which would plague him for the rest of his life. Redford became a helicopter father before the term existed. He watched James like a hawk. He used his millions to get the best doctors. He thought he had won. He thought he had beaten the curse. For 50 years, he watched James grow up, become a filmmaker, become an activist, and become a father himself. They were best friends. But in 2020, the curse came back to finish the job. The fatal blow. October 2020. The world was in chaos due to the pandemic. But inside Robert Redford's ranch in Utah, the world was ending for a different reason. His son, James Redford, died of bile duct cancer. He was 58 years old. James wasn't just his son, he was his soulmate. They shared everything. They shared a love for nature, for documentaries, for the environment. James was the one person who truly understood the man behind a movie star. Redford spent 58 years worrying about him, protecting him and loving him, and in the end, he had to bury him. At 84 years old, to bury a second child is a cruelty that the human heart is not designed to withstand. The grief is immeasurable with the loss of a child, Redford's representative said in a brief statement. But words cannot capture the devastation. Friends say that something in Robert Redford died that day. The spark, that famous twinkle in his blue eyes, vanished. He looked frail. He looked lost. He stopped dyeing his hair. He stopped caring about his appearance. He realized that all his Oscars, all his money, all his legacy meant absolutely nothing compared to the empty chair at the dinner table. He had outlived 2 sons. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. He retreated into absolute silence. He stopped giving interviews. He stopped making appearances. He spent his days walking the trails of his ranch, trails he used to walk with James. He would sit by the river for hours, just staring at the water. His wife, Sibylle, watched him with breaking heart. She knew he wasn't just grieving. He was fading. He was a man who was done with the world. He was tired of the pain. He began to speak less about the future and more about the past. He began to talk about seeing them again. The long wait. For the last 5 years of his life, Robert Redford was physically present but spiritually absent. He lived in Utah, surrounded by the nature he loved, but the mountains that once gave him strength now just reminded him of the void. He watched the seasons change. Winter to spring, spring to summer. But for him, it was always winter. He turned 85, then 88, then 89. Most people celebrate longevity. Redford viewed it as a sentence. Why was he still here? Why was he the one left behind? He saw his peers passing away. He saw the industry he built change into something he didn't recognize. But mostly he just missed James. He organized his affairs. He sold properties. He simplified his life. It was a process of letting go. He wasn't suicidal. He was just resigned. He was like a passenger waiting at a train station for a train that was running late. He famously told a close friend in 2024, "I've had a good run, but the best part of me is already on the other side." And then, in September 2025, his body finally agreed with his heart. He didn't have a dramatic illness. He didn't battle a long disease. He simply started to shut down. The energy required to keep a broken heart beating is immense. And at 89, he ran out of energy. He lay in his bed at the Sundance Resort, looking out at the aspen trees turning gold in the autumn light. His family gathered. His daughters, Shauna and Amy. His grandchildren. His wife, Sibylle. The room was filled with love. But Redford was looking past them. The final revelation. September 16th, 2025. The final moments. The room was quiet, save for the soft rustle of the wind outside the window. The sun was setting behind Mount Timpanogos, casting a long, violet shadow across the valley he had spent a lifetime protecting. According to sources close to the family, Redford was peaceful. He wasn't afraid. In fact, for the first time in 5 years, the tension in his face seemed to dissolve. He seemed relieved. In his final moment of consciousness, he reportedly leaned forward slightly, his eyes focusing on something no one else in the room could see. The fog of age seemed to lift. He whispered his final truth. He said, "I see him. He's waiting." He wasn't talking about God. He wasn't talking about angels. He was talking about James. For 5 years, he had lived with the crushing weight of separation, a burden that bowed his shoulders and silenced his voice. But in that final second, the weight was lifted. Witnesses say a faint smile touched his lips, a smile the world hadn't truly seen since 2020. He wasn't dying. He was reuniting. He closed his eyes, let out a long, shuddering breath, and simply stopped. The Sundance Kid didn't ride off into the sunset alone. He rode off to meet his son. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes. Doctors will say his heart stopped beating because of age, but we know the truth. Medical science cannot measure a broken heart, and it cannot quantify the will to live. Robert Redford died because he was done waiting. He died because his heart was split in two, and he needed to go to the other side to find the missing piece. The biological machinery just finally agreed with the soul's decision to leave. The legend goes home. The news of his death brought tributes from around the world. People talked about the sting. They talked about all the president's men. They talked about how he changed independent cinema forever with the Sundance Film Festival. But looking back now, his greatest role wasn't on screen. His greatest role was father. And his greatest tragedy was outliving the people he built his world around. His story is a reminder that even the golden boys bleed. It reminds us that fame is a costume and money is just paper. The Oscars are cold metal statues that cannot hold your hand when you are afraid. The only thing that matters, the only thing, is who is waiting for you at the end. Robert Redford is no longer lonely. He is no longer walking the empty trails of his ranch, looking for ghosts in the trees. He is back with Scott. He is back with James. The family is whole again. We can imagine them now, somewhere beyond the pain, riding horses across a meadow that never ends, the sun shining on their faces, young and free forever. So tonight, don't mourn for Robert Redford. Be happy for him. He finally got the one thing Hollywood could never give him. He got to go home. What do you think? Do you believe that people can choose the moment they go? And is Robert Redford the greatest actor of his generation? Let us know in the comments below. Rest in peace, Robert. You've earned your rest. Thank you for watching.